not that this player is a first round pick and expected to be the next greatest Finnish goaltender, but being a second rounder and going to a team who understands how to properly draft good players in Seattle, I'm excited to see what this kid can do. So Niklas Kokko, the goalie for Team Finland, that's who I'm keeping my eye on.
You're now listening to the Boys in the Booth podcast with your hosts, Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams.
That's a big one.
Yeah!
All right, welcome back to the Boys in the Booth podcast, episode 193. This is part 2 of our World Juniors preview show, and we're going to be diving into players to watch in Group A and Group B, obviously continuing with the other 4 teams in Group A after touching on 3 players to watch for Team Canada in our previous episode featuring TSN Director of Scouting Craig Button. Feel free to check that out if you haven't done so already. And in case you missed that one, we touched on players to watch such as Denton Matejchuk, Carson Rekop, Seattle Kraken, Pick, and Matthew Savoy. So continuing with Group A, fellas, let's get into Team Sweden. Players to watch there. Case?
Yeah, so you might scoff at this guy's 9 points in 45 total SHL games, but I'm going to go with Otto Stenberg. This guy when he plays in his own age group, he dominates. In the U18 World Junior Championship last year, he scored 7 goals, 9 assists in 7 games, getting himself on the All-Star team and as well the top 3 player of the tournament for Sweden. He drove this team to a silver medal in the Helinka Gretzky Cup to bring his U18 all competition numbers to 17 goals, 32 points in 19 games. So Sweden's very familiar with this guy. There's a ton of guys you could take from Sweden that are offensive threats, but I think that Otto Stenberg is going to continue his dominance in his age group and take over this tournament. He's got a fantastic set of hands, and it got him drafted 25th overall last year, and that's the guy I'll be watching for Sweden.
Yeah, that's a good pick. Like you said, there are so many good players to watch on this team. I think the number is 4. All but 4 players on this team are drafted to the NHL. So that just goes to show, the kind of competition that other teams will be facing when they go up against Team Sweden. I think this year, the players that are going to be carrying this team, at least offensively, I think they will certainly be looking to Philip Bystedt, the San Jose pick, who, we watched last year. He had 10 points in just 7 games played. But Stenberg could be a player who is maybe able to produce some secondary scoring. So I like that pick. I'm going to go in a bit of a different direction, and I'm going to pick Jonathan Lekkerimäki, the 15th overall pick by the Vancouver Canucks in 2022. He played on this team last year, the Sweden World Junior Championship team. He had just 4 points in 7 games. I think this season or this year rather at this tournament, he'll be in a better position to kind of carry the offense along with a player like Philip Bystedt. And I think if you're a Canucks fan, you might have been a little more upset with the lack of production last year if your team wasn't so good this season. So I don't think they're worried about some of their prospects because the actual NHL team is really, really good right now. But I think, Canucks fans and fans of the NHL in general will be looking to Jonathan Lekkerimäki to put up some decent numbers and sort of carry the offense for this team.
Well, Vancouver has 3 players on this team, so I think they'll be watching Sweden pretty close. They also have Elias Pettersson 2.0, and Tom Willander. Lekkerimäki, I think, is kind of, I was expecting one of you guys to bring him up. When you look at production in their respective leagues, there's a lot of guys on this team playing in the SHL, which scares me for them being in the same group as Canada. But Lekkerimäki by far is leading in production when it comes to SHL points. So yeah, he's going to be the guy that I kind of expected Fabian Lysell to be last year. But it doesn't necessarily always turn out that way for Sweden. I think we were also talking about Lekkerimäki at one time before the tournament last year as an 18-year-old. So I think, maybe he does have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder coming into this tournament.
Well, I think just being a year older means that he's probably better positioned to put up some decent numbers. Like, I was just looking at last year's statistics, and I mentioned that he had 4 points in 7 games. It was Ludvig Johnson, who was a pick of the
Florida
Panthers, who had 10 points in 7 games, and also Philip Bystedt, who I mentioned, who also had 10 points in 7 games, a San Jose pick. Leo Carlsson was a guy who will not be there again this year because he is currently in the NHL and having a great rookie season. But if you just go down the list, like, there weren't many absolute superstars on that team last year. Aside from maybe a Carlsson who was an 18-year-old, but it's kind of the same story this year. Like, they have some good players in who have been picked relatively high, who are going to be in a position to put up points. I think they'll score by committee. They're going to be a team who gets it done that way. And, the Swedes, like, the more I look up and down their roster, they've got a pretty good squad. And I think Lekkerimäki should be one of their go-to forwards in terms of the scoring. I still think it will be Philip Bystedt, seeing as how he led the team last year and is returning. But I think Lekkerimäki, you can expect him to improve his production this year.
Well, it's always nice to see, the host team of the tournament being projected so highly. The tournament is in Sweden this year, and this team is pretty loaded from top to bottom with a lot of depth. And touching on the 2 players that you guys just mentioned, Otto Stenberg, case your pick there, late first rounder, one of 3 first round picks for the St. Louis Blues in this past draft, as they continue to try and retool things there. And I think that he's going to end up being a nice player for them. I know that Jason Bukala of Sportsnet talked very highly of him and just his complete 200-foot game and being able to play in all situations. And I think that he'll be a very reliable player for this Sweden squad. And then Lekkerimäki certainly has that goal scoring ability. I think he was a player that, we look at from that 2022 draft as maybe a potential steal for the Vancouver Canucks, and continues to come along here. And so it'll be interesting to see what kind of impact he'll have on the Swedish team. But Chad, you mentioned him a couple of times. Philip Bystedt, man, that's going to be my player to watch. I'm taking him for the 2nd year in a row. I believe I took him last year, and ended up being a good pick from yours truly. So I'll give myself a pat on the back for that one. 10 points in 7 games. I'll go with Bystedt again. He'll be leaned on as one of the leaders of this team. I think he's a big body down the middle, which you always like to have, and obviously a San Jose first rounder. And I just think that, again, like Stenberg, plays a complete 200-foot game, very responsible player. Again, he's got that size in the middle of the ice, which is what you like. And, as a 19-year-old vet in this tournament, I don't see his production or impact slowing down at all. So, yeah, going with Bystedt once again for the Swedes.
Yeah, well, he's an absolute beast. So I expect, another year older after having a successful tournament last year. I expect him to dominate for this team, and San Jose has got a couple good Swedes on their hands, and him and William Eklund, hopefully they'll be playing on a line one day. That'd be fun to watch. So definitely a player to watch. Kind of blew up, maybe unexpected last year, but I'm expecting the same from him again.
And just for reference, I'll probably do this for every team we talk about. Here are the players that we picked last year and how they did. So for Team Sweden, I picked Axel Sandin Pellikka. He had 1 assist in 7 games. He'll be a guy coming in this year after being picked pretty highly by the Detroit Red Wings as a defenseman relied on to, log a lot of minutes and play in all situations. Case picked Fabian Lysell, who we mentioned, a player that we all liked. But coming out of that tournament, he had 0 points in 7 games, which is just crazy. That was so disappointing. With all that being said, he currently has 15 points in 21 AHL games for the Providence Bruins this season. So maybe just too many cooks in the kitchen on that Team Sweden last year. Not really sure exactly what happened. And then Harp, you were right. Last year, you picked Philip Bystedt, who, like we mentioned, had 4 goals, 6 assists for 10 points in 7 games.
Nice. All right, let's get to Team Finland. Obviously, Sweden's bitter rival, and it's going to be a lot of fun to see these two squads in the same group. That's for sure. Let's get to the Finns now, and Case, we'll go back to you with your player to watch on Team Finland.
Yeah, well, this is the one I foreshadowed a little bit. If you listen to our Canada deep dive, because we were talking about the Seattle Kraken and their drafting so far and how it's been pretty good. And in particular, in that second round, we talked about Carson Reckhoff, who they picked 50th overall in round 2 in 2022, or in 2023, while in round 2, 49th overall, 2022, they picked Jani Nyman. And he is my player to watch on Finland. He was good, not great for them last year, but he comes into this another year older and leading La Liga in goals as a 19-year-old. Size, hands, and a powerful shot makes him a threat like at all times. One of those guys with a strange stat line where he's had more goals than assists in every league or tournament he's played in the last few years. So this is going to be the trigger man for Finland, and every team better be watching him out there.
Honestly, I love that. That is amazing. To have more goals than assists is so rare, and to do it consistently is even more rare. So that's absolutely great. Wow, Case, you really threw me for a loop there, because you picked a second round pick by the Seattle Kraken to talk about as your player to watch, which, by the way, Nyman's a great pick. I think he's going to have a great tournament. 6'4", 207. Are you kidding me? He's going to be a man against boys out there. But I was worried because I thought you picked a player who I wanted to talk about as a player to watch, who was the other second round pick of the Seattle Kraken on this team. Yep. And I told you guys that I was going to talk about one goalie, and that goalie for Team Finland is Nicholas Kokko, drafted 58th overall by Seattle in 2022. He's a 2004 born player. He was the backup last year, didn't get any playing time, but is the oldest goalie on the team this year and projected to be the starter. In that 2022 draft, he was the second goalie picked. Here's a little trivia. Can you guys name the first goalie picked in the 2022 draft?
I don't know. Sebastian Cossa, was he 2022?
Nope.
No, first goalie.
Harper, I'm looking at you.
First goalie.
It's a Buffalo Sabre.
Harper, I'm looking at you. Picked 41st overall.
My goodness. Yes. I might butcher this. Topi Laininen.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know if you pronounce the S. I don't know if it's like French that way, but it's Topias or Topi Laininen.
Yes,
41st overall in
Nice.
2022. He is also Finnish, but did not make the team. The Finnish team decided to go with Nicholas Kokko, who is my player to watch. Like I mentioned, he was the backup last year, or I guess third stringer, but he will be the starter this year. And you know, we've mentioned a few times that goaltending in this tournament, especially for Team Canada, is kind of just hit or miss, and they usually just pick the guy who, you know, is having a good year or hot at the time. With Kokko, you know, being a relatively high pick for a goaltender, I'm excited to see what he can do in this tournament. You know, looking back, we've seen other highly drafted goalies. You know, for Canada, it was like a Carter Hart. For you know, some other teams, like there was Kosa and Wallstedt and Askarov, etc. The list goes on. And not that this player is a first round pick and expected to be the next greatest Finnish goaltender, but being a second rounder and going to a team who understands how to properly draft good players in Seattle, I'm excited to see what this kid can do. So Niklas Kokko, the goalie for Team Finland, that's who I'm keeping my eye on.
Yeah, well, Seattle, again, another second round pick that's looks like it's worked out so far, as much as it can at this point. They did pick 3 times in that second round. The last one being David Goyette, who's another player that arguably left off of Team Canada. He played for them in the U18s. He had 92 points in the OHL last year and is on pace for over 100 this year. So, God, Seattle.
Don't let them draft in the second round, man. Those guys are lethal.
Yeah, no, they're doing a great job over there. And another goaltender for Finland, Emil Vinny, I believe. He's a draft eligible goaltender in the upcoming draft, I believe.
Yeah, 2005 born player,
yeah.
17 years old right now, 6'2", 187, playing in the Mestis right now, so the second Finnish league.
Yeah. Excellent. But yeah, no, great picks again, fellas, for players to watch for Team Finland. I'm going to stick with my San Jose Sharks theme here and go with Kasper Halttunen of Team Finland. And look, guys, like San Jose, terrible start to the season. They've been playing a lot better as of late, beating some really good teams, and we kind of wondered if they would maybe win more games than they should. Took a little while, but they certainly are doing that, and we kind of predicted that coming into the season. But anyway, with San Jose, we're gonna really see some of their future in this tournament. Will Smith, Team USA, Bysted, who we touched on a few minutes ago for Team Sweden, Jake Furlong, defenseman for Team Canada. He made the team there, and Kasper Halttunen, who was an early second round pick in this past draft. 20 goals in 28 games with London in the OHL. So a teammate of Easton Cowan of your Toronto Maple Leafs there, Chad. And this kid can shoot the puck. Like Case, you talked about Nyman as a someone for Finland who can fire pucks. So can this Halttunen. And he's got some size as well. I believe he's 6'3", and again, they could have some real threats on the wings here in Nyman and Halttunen, just to name a few. And we've kind of seen that a lot in the past with these Finnish teams, right? I mean, Kemmel, kind of the most recent one, Eli Tolvanen a few years back for this team. So I feel like every single year when we come into this tournament and prior to and talk about Team Finland, they always have one or two guys that can be that trigger man and just fire pucks. And Halttunen is another one of those guys.
To add one more to that list of players and a guy in this tournament as maybe an extra pick for the listeners is Lenny Hyman-Aho, who is the Devils' second round pick last year, absolutely tearing up the Finnish league to start this season. I think in the first 15 games, he was wearing the golden helmet, meaning he was leading the league in points as a 19-year-old. And another guy who scores at will. He's got 11 goals in the Finnish league, again, at 19 years old, just behind Jani Nyman. So Nyman, Halttunen, and Hyman-Aho, God, I hope there's someone to pass these guys the puck, because they have some trigger men, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, just going to be a bunch of individual efforts out there, just trying to rip the puck like Patrick Laine. By the way, speaking of Patrick Laine, Columbus is up 5-0 on Toronto. Right?
Of course.
Wow.
So I mean, I said right from the start, it's a trap game. 5-0 right now. Harper, your pick, Halttunen.
Kasper Halttunen.
Kasper Halttunen is one of only 2 players on this Finnish team who is playing in the OHL. Actually, one of 3 players. So I feel like that is always something that is a bit of an underrated experience when it comes to some of the players in this tournament. If you have experience playing against some of the best Canadian and American players in the CHL or the NCAA or the USHL, what have you, I feel like that can be a leg up. So maybe Halttunen will use that to his advantage playing for the London Knights.
Absolutely. No, he'll be a great player to watch. And again, San Jose, we're really going to see some big parts of their future in this tournament. So, all right, fellas, 2 more teams to wrap up Group A here, Germany and Latvia. Let's get to the Germans. Case.
Yeah, it's funny how the way I pick players switches when we get to these teams that are maybe not the favorites to win the tournament. I switch from guys who dominated last year or who are high draft picks to guys that, are up and coming. So I went and picked Paul Mayer as my player to watch for Germany. He's a notable prospect for this upcoming draft, kind of a guy that could land in the second round, maybe third round. And, despite him being one of the youngest players on this team, I'm actually expecting him to get a good chunk of the ice time and maybe the tough matchups against a team like Canada and Sweden and Finland. Because of the way he plays his game, he plays gritty, tough defense, and that's what they're going to need playing against those top teams. He's one of only 3 defensemen on this team that are playing in a top flight professional league. He plays in the Dell again at the age of 18, a very young 18. He turned 18 in September. He's playing in the Dell and getting decent minutes. So this is a guy I expect to be pretty big for this German team. And kind of the horse for them on the back end. I don't expect him to be really scoring very much, but playing the tough minutes.
Yeah, and Case, similarly to how I just mentioned for some Finnish players playing in North America, having a bit of an edge because they played against some of the better Canadian and American players. I think some of the players playing for teams like, Germany and Switzerland who play at their country's respective top levels against men also have a bit of an advantage in that way because they're playing against fully developed grown men in all of their puck battles. They have to, grip their sticks a little bit harder and they have to think a little bit faster and all of that. So I think that can be a plus for some of the players on this team playing in the top leagues. That being said, and I do think it's a good pick and we'll be, obviously paying close attention to see how Paul Mayer does after having that experience for Alder Mannheim, which, by the way, well-respected team. But my pick is going to be the same player I picked last year, and that's Julian Lutz. It's the low-hanging fruit, Lutz, however you want to say it. But it sticks with my theme of players who are playing in North America. And Lutz is a player who is playing in the USHL for the Green Bay Gamblers. Great name, by the way, the Green Bay Gamblers. Has 23 points in 19 games played. And like I mentioned, he's a returning player for this team. So, and I guess it goes without saying, but I feel like most people listening know that he is one of the 3 players on this team who has been drafted to the NHL. He was drafted by Arizona. So I'll be looking to Lutz to carry the offense for this team. And hopefully, given the fact that he has experience playing in the USHL, he'll have a bit of a leg up on some of the competition.
Yeah, I mean, he's putting up some pretty good points in the USHL. And when you're talking about North American hockey experience versus pro, he did play pro last year where he played for the championship team in the Dell, which was Munich. So
there you go.
Guess he's got all the experience you mentioned.
Talk about another team who is going to be represented well at this tournament, the Arizona Coyotes. I think that Bill Armstrong and company there have done a great job with their drafting. A couple of pretty good players on Team Canada. Samu Bao is in this tournament as well. He was a second or third round pick this past year, I believe. They've got a pretty good goaltender in this tournament. And then Lutz, who is returning, has certainly been set back at times by injuries, but no doubt the talent is there, the goal scoring ability, and skates pretty well also. So I just hope that he does have some players around him that can help him out a little bit on this German team, because not as strong as we've seen in years past with players such as Stützle and Peterka and Seider, and the list goes on.
The German program is getting pretty damn good, man. Like, it
sure is.
This year the team isn't great, but they have some players who are drafted. They have the 3 players mentioned who are drafted. They have 4 players playing in North America right now, which is, usually a good sign for players who are already drafted or expected to be drafted. You'd like to put yourself in the North American showcase. And, even though the team isn't going to be as good this year as it has been in previous years, I think they'll always be a pesky team to play. That's for sure. And just like going back to Lutz, I'm hoping that he's able to, produce a little bit more than he did last year for the sake of the Coyotes franchise. He had 2 points in 5 games played last year, which, for Team Germany, they're not scoring a lot. So just to be in on the offense at all is a plus, but you'd like to see a little bit more production out of a program that, like we keep mentioning year over year, is getting better.
Yeah, it sure is. And my player to watch for Team Germany is, one of those guys, as you mentioned, Chad, that's playing over in North America, is an NHL draft pick, and that's Norwin Panocha, 7th rounder of the Buffalo Sabres. Geez, this division is, or Group A is turning into the Buffalo and San Jose group for me so far. But yeah, going with Panocha. Left shot D, 7th rounder of the Sabres this year, described as Germany's best defender at the U18s last year. Can play in all situations, and who knows? Maybe Panocha ends up being this year's Maximilian Zuber for Germany. Zuber, another Arizona pick who played very well a couple of years ago for this German team, and who has shot up the ranks in terms of the prospect pool for the Arizona Coyotes. So looking at Panocha as a player to watch, and certainly like that he's a Sabres pick there, and maybe someone who is a late round pick that can kind of raise his stock a little bit at this tournament, and certainly be counted on in all situations for this German team.
Yeah, one thing that Germany has to pay attention to is when you're playing teams like Canada and Sweden and Finland, you got to stay out of the box. And looking at some of the stats when I was doing the research on this team, these guys can't stay out of the box. In particular, their defenders, and in particular, Paul Mayer, who I picked. I think in the U18s, he had 27 PIMs in 5 games. And then Nihus had 54 in 5 games. So I guess when you're always playing in your own end and against top flight teams, that's what's going to happen. But yeah, they got to stay out of the sin bin in the World Juniors, because power play goals galore.
Oh man, we will never forget that Swiss coach the one year who was just brutally honest about, his team going up against a squad like Team Canada. That was pretty great.
They're bigger than us. They're faster than us. They shoot harder than us.
I was waiting for that.
How many first round picks do they have? We have 3 drafted players.
That was gold. All right, fellas. Final team in Group A here, and that is Team Latvia. So let's get into the Latvians, and then we'll get into our players to watch in Group B.
Yeah, which, funny enough, this was the game that was played in Brockville. If you guys can remember that, Team Germany versus Latvia was played at the Memorial Center. And
that was ages ago.
I was picked to be the puck boy for Team Germany. And I don't have too many memories from that, except them trying to tell me to go pick up the pucks in German. And I was like, I don't speak that. And
you're like, Dutch is pretty close.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know. I got some Dutch in my family, and my Oma used to speak Dutch to me, so does that help? But Yeah, so for Team Latvia, I kind of went in a similar direction as I did with Germany. I picked a player that I think is another notable prospect coming up in this draft that could be in the higher rounds and in round 2 or 3 maybe, and that's Eriks Matejko. He's a large player with over a point per game in the QMJHL. He was a top 3 player of the tournament last year at the U18s when he captained that team. So I think that they're going to expect big things from him, considering he's familiar in the system. He's a player that's playing in North America and doing fairly well at that. So he's my player to watch. Not much else I know about this guy except for what I just said.
Yeah, and I mean, that's fair, right? Like, we're talking about Team Latvia here, a team who, isn't always even in this tournament. It's one of these teams who can get relegated if they do poorly. So it makes sense. Matejko is a guy, like you mentioned, Case, who is playing in North America, which I keep coming back to. I think that's such a plus. And another player who is playing in North America, who I'm going to pick as my player to watch, who actually, Case, you picked last year as a player to watch, and he had a decent tournament, is Sandis Vilmanis. So a returning player who has 28 points in 30 games in the OHL for the Sarnia Sting as a winger. And, he will be a guy who on this team, which, like, let's be honest, they don't have a ton of star power up front and aren't overly deep. Vilmanis will be one of the guys who is relied on pretty heavily to produce offense. For a variety of reasons. He's a returning player, 1. 2, he has some pretty decent numbers playing in the OHL. And 3, I guess just that experience of playing in North America. I think all of that's important. So he will be relied on to produce for this team. But, it'll be an interesting tournament because, similar to Germany, even though I think Latvia is a bit of a step behind in terms of their program, it is getting better. And they will be a pesky team to play against, even if they don't get many W's.
Yeah, I mean, if they who shall not be named were in this tournament, Latvia wouldn't be here this year. So, yeah. I mean, that goes to show they're always teeter-tottering, them, as well as Austria and Norway, and Kazakhstan at one time was certainly there. But yeah. There's a few teams that are coming in and out, and they want to gain that same area that Germany is in right now, yeah. Where Germany used to be a team that was in the relegation talks. Well, I kind of expect them to stick around every year now. So yeah, that's where Latvia, I think, Germany's a step or a few steps behind Slovakia, obviously. Like, they're years behind Slovakia, while Latvia is a couple of years behind Germany, and that's kind of the ratings of these things.
Yeah, like Latvia, I would say, is in the same kind of group as, like, some of the countries you mentioned, but then also like a Denmark. I don't think you mentioned. That's another team who's kind of like knocking at the door. Like, there are these countries that are relatively small in population, but have the climate to develop hockey players. So they have some great players. And even over the years, like, we've seen some pretty good players come from these countries, like Denmark, for example, a bunch of players. But Freddie Anderson's the one that comes to mind. Great Danish player. Kazakhstan, even, think of like a Nick Antropov, who he was an incredible player. So there's talent out there, and the odd year you will get a player or two like that on one of these teams who is sort of teetering on relegation. But just focusing on this year, there are a few players who we will be looking at. Vilmanis is one of the 2 players who is drafted to the NHL by the Panthers. The other player who's drafted to the NHL is Dans Lockmelis by Boston. He was a player we talked about last year as well. So
I can hear Ray Ferraro saying his name. So yeah. Just to give you a little peek behind the curtain, Denmark actually almost got relegated even further this year.
I know.
They're a -10 on goal differential and went 1-1-3 in Group 1A. So I was actually looking at that earlier in the year because I was looking to find where the Netherlands stands. I know that they were just promoted to Group 2A, so I was hoping that they'd either stick around or maybe play a big promotion story, but they'll be sticking around there again this year.
Yeah. Like we said, there's some teams who are, or some countries who are like knocking on the door, but just not quite there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, talking about Latvia as a growing hockey country, look, they won the bronze medal at the men's world championships back in the summertime. Arturs Silovs, who is a good goaltending prospect for the Vancouver Canucks, was absolutely stellar in that. And I actually watched the end of that game. Christians Rubens with the overtime
Legend.
winner in that at the Leafs legend with the OT winner in that game. And I thought, man, so great for Latvia winning a medal at a big event like that. So that's fantastic. Obviously, I think it's safe to say they won't win a medal at this event, but certainly some interesting players to watch on this Latvian team. You mentioned a couple of them. I've got a guy who I really think is interesting for this team. Niks Fanenko is this player for Latvia. Left shot D, 19-year-old from Riga. And if you look at his numbers on Hockey DB, fellas, third season with Baie-Comeau in the QMJHL, and his numbers just get better every single year. So 40 and 62 and 21-22. Last season, 37 and 56, so less points, but fewer games played there. And he's already got 25 in 29 to start the season for Baie-Comeau. So I can certainly see Fanenko in his third appearance at the World Juniors with Latvia being a go-to guy for this team. And then an NHL team taking a run at him as one of the older players in this upcoming draft. An NHL team taking a run at him in one of the later rounds just for prospect depth in their system. So keeping an eye on Niks Fanenko.
Yeah, and it's interesting too when you look at teams like this to see some of the players who have not been drafted, who are either still, expecting to be drafted or maybe just expecting to have a tryout in North America. And I especially think that's, relevant for the guys playing in North America like a Fanenko. So we'll see what happens. Maybe he'll be their horse on the back end.
I mean, he's got to be on some radar somewhere. Playing in North America is going to give him a better advantage to get picked in one of these late rounds. But he was also the first overall pick in the import draft in the CHL. So, it's not like he's been unnoticed. That's how he got to Baie-Comeau.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right, fellas. Well, there we go. That wraps up the rest of Group A for this 2024 World Juniors Tournament in Sweden. And now we will get into Group B.
Sports betting has rapidly risen in popularity, and I want to connect you all with an opportunity to get started or to get ahead. Having multiple sportsbook accounts is the most simple way to maximize your profits, and there's never been a better time to sign up. So when you visit our page at signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth, you'll be connected to all the sportsbooks in your region, along with a review of each platform and its unique benefits. All of these sportsbooks have valuable sign-up offers for new users, and when you register through the link, you will automatically receive the top offer at each one. When you use multiple sportsbooks, you ensure that you can always access the best available odds, which is key to successful sports betting. So if you want to take advantage of these benefits and support our brand in the meantime, please consider signing up for your next sportsbook at signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth. This podcast is sponsored by the best ticket app out there, SeatGeek. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, making it quick and easy to get the best deals on tickets to your favorite sporting events. Plus, Boys in the Booth listeners get $20 off their first ticket purchase on SeatGeek using the promo code BOYSINTHEBOOTH in all caps. So click the link in the description down below to download the app, and remember to get your discounted tickets using the code BOYSINTHEBOOTH in all caps. Get great seats for a fraction of the cost with SeatGeek.
All right, fellas, that wraps it up for Group A. Let's get into Group B. And we'll start with Team Czechia, who have a lot of intriguing players on this roster again this year. Won a silver medal last year in an epic gold medal game against Canada. Dylan Gunther, of course, scoring the golden goal in Halifax. What a tournament that was. And
Mason
Czechia,
McTavish saving it off the line too. You have to mention that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that was and that was in the summer, obviously, last year at that tournament that got affected.
Oh, is that
by
not
COVID.
even?
Yeah, it
Is
wasn't
that-
even the same tournament. That was in the summer.
Because it was within 6 months, I guess that's why I'm getting confused.
Yeah.
But
Oh, I mean, yeah. No, it's all
they
good
blend
there,
for me
but-
as well. I was doing the same thing earlier.
it's so hard, man. The summer tournament threw everything for a loop, but honestly, I
Well, it
loved
did.
it. I thought it was so cool.
Yeah, I know. I will say, because of the timing of it, and I mean, all three of us can agree. Like, summertime is busy, and you're not really watching hockey in the summertime. So, didn't pay much attention to that tournament. But last year's tournament was phenomenal. We should mention that before we get into Group B. And Czechia was right there, man. They pushed Canada right to the brink. And almost won a gold medal, but they won silver. This team was pretty stacked last year. They have a lot of returning players, and so let's kick off Group B by getting into the silver medal winning Team Czechia from last year.
All right, I'll go first. There's, like you said, a number of players that you can talk about on this team. I personally have talked Edard Chalet to death, so I'm not going to pick him this year for once. I think I've been picking him since he was 15 years old, it feels like. I'm actually going to be picking a player the Sens fans are going to be happy to hear I'm highlighting, and that's Tomáš Hamara. Guarantee I named that right. This is his third appearance in the U20 tournament, as well as he was a part of that silver medal team. He took a bit of a backseat, having 1 assist in 7 games, and 1 assist in 7 games the year before. But I expect him to come back, kind of like you've mentioned in the Group A chat. Chad is coming back with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, more experience, and kind of expecting to be a little bit more on the offensive when it comes to playing D, because he's not only a physical player on the back end, but he's got an excellent first pass, and that's what got him drafted by the Senators, is his passing ability as well as his physical play. So a little two-way action. Maybe we're expecting to see a little more of the one-way this year for him.
Mm-hmm. That's a good pick. Like you mentioned, there are so many players to pick from this team, because they have some really good returning players, but also like about half of their roster are drafted to the NHL, maybe a little bit less than half. So like they've got some guys, and I think it's safe to say that Czechia is no longer a complete underdog when it comes to this tournament. I think, their program, like Germany and to a lesser extent like Latvia, has just been getting better over the years. And, you look up and down this roster now, and they have a bunch of really good players. And, Yuri Kulich is a guy who stands out to me, and he had a great tournament last year. And he was one of the players we picked to watch last year. And he kind of delivered on that too. Like, he had a really great tournament. So just looking at that, the players that we picked last year, we picked Stanislav Svozil, Edward Shala, like you mentioned, Case, that's who you picked, and Yuri Kulich. And all three of those players had incredible tournaments. So it'll be interesting to watch how they do this year. I am going to run it back and pick Edward Shala, because this is a player who, it seems like this is a theme of this episode, but a player who was picked by the Seattle Kraken. He was picked 20th overall by the Kraken, and, had a great tournament last year. And by all accounts, he should be the go-to, or one of the go-to offensive players for this team this year. I think it'll be him and Kulich, if I were to guess who the 1-2 punch will be. But yeah, I'm just looking forward to seeing what Shala can do at this tournament, being another year older. So I will be looking at Shala, who again had 6 points in 7 games last year.
Yeah, I mean, it was him and Svozil who have been playing. These guys both cracked this team so young, and we've been talking about them for a while. And I mean, he showed up last year, and it's totally leading towards him being a dominant player. You can tell that we've been back to back on 3 episodes, because I can't get words out of my mouth.
I know.
But yeah, I expect big things out of him.
Yeah, and like his production in the OHL is pretty good too. I think as a first rounder, you'd like it to be a bit better. Maybe it's just because, he's been around this World Junior team for so long, so it seems like he's older than he is. But, he has 21 points in 25 OHL games. I think coming into this tournament, like I mentioned, it'll be him and Kulich. Kulich obviously is the Buffalo pick who was really, really good for Team Czechia last year. I think it'll be those two who will be, driving the offense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be those two, and you look at the production that Yuri Kulich had in the American Hockey League last season as well, in Rochester. Absolutely excellent player there. And my player to watch for Czechia, guys, is a defenseman. And the last name is a familiar one to us from last year, and that is Juracek, Adam Juracek, the younger brother of David, Columbus Blue Jackets first rounder, obviously, and Adam, by all accounts, could go top 10 in this upcoming draft, which is absolutely stacked with blue liners, by the way.
Do you want to hear where Adam is on some of these rankings here?
Sure.
Consolidated ranking, he's number 9. Elite Prospects, he's number 10. Daily Faceoff has him at 10. The Hockey News and Bob McKenzie have him at 8. McKean's has him at 19. Craig Button has him at 6th, who, by the way, if you didn't listen to the Craig Button feature on our last episode, do so now. That was with him and Harper talking about this upcoming World Juniors tournament, so make sure you check that out. And then lastly, Dauber Prospects has him at 14. So yes, Adam Juracek is in and around the top 10 for this upcoming draft.
Yeah, and look, just as a little side note, I would love for the Blue Jackets to be able to get both Juracek brothers and Svozil, Matejchuk as well, that we mentioned on Canada. Man, we talk about future blue lines in the NHL. Anaheim's is going to be disgusting, but man, Columbus, like that blue line in the future, obviously with Matejchuk and Juracek, is going to be something else. But Svozil, he was, one of those horses on the back end for Czechia last year, and to have David's younger brother Adam, who is also a pretty highly touted prospect on this team, that's very exciting. So I'm hoping that Columbus can get this kid as well. He is slight in weight for his height. He's just around 6'1", 6'2". Not a ton of weight there, but still has a lot of room to fill out, obviously, like a lot of players coming into this tournament. But look, man, he's got that long reach, and obviously has seen and grew up kind of under his brother's wings. So certainly expecting great things from this player, the younger brother of David Juracek, obviously Adam, and I think he's going to be really good for this Czech team, and certainly is projected to go high in the upcoming draft.
If you're building a blue line, Harper, from scratch, who do you take? Anaheim and the prospects they have, or Columbus?
It's tough, man. I think I would have to lean more to the Anaheim Ducks, to be honest with you, with Zellweger and the way that that Minchikov has played, and Leno, Hines. I mean, Jesus, they had the top three defensemen in the CHL, all three leagues last year. Guess what? They were all Anaheim Ducks prospects. So I have to give the edge to Anaheim's future blue line, but Columbus is right there as well.
But Anaheim's been pumping out defense for the last 15 years.
Yes.
They'll just end up getting good and trading them. So
that is true. Think about again, we're rambling on here a little bit, but just as a side note, think about all the defensemen that Anaheim has had that they've parted ways with. Shea Theodore, Brandon Montour, a couple of names that come to mind. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah. I think I would also lean Anaheim, because I didn't know Minchikov was this good. Like, he's been really good this season, but yeah. So I think that does it for me. But Columbus, man, they have a good prospect pool, especially on the back end.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's for sure. So yeah, Adam Juracek, my player to watch for the Czechs. All right, fellas, let's move on to Team USA, and certainly the US looks strong coming into this tournament. They won a bronze medal in last year's tournament in what was a wild bronze medal game, if you can remember, against Team Sweden. I mean, that was absolutely wild. Both medal round games, by the way, both medal games, the gold and the bronze, going to overtime, which was really something to see. Rutger McGroarty had the overtime winner for the U.S. in that bronze medal game. So players to watch for Team USA, fellas, our arch rival.
Yeah. The team that I've found myself rooting for because so many Devils have been on them lately. But yes, normally I'm against this group, and probably will continue this way. I was thinking about taking a Devil as my player to watch in this team because I think Seamus Casey is going to be an absolute horse for them on the back end. Hopefully PP1 for him. He's been phenomenal in Michigan. He's going to be the next big Michigan defenseman that they continue to pump out as well. Talk about pumping out defensemen. I'm going to go with what I feel is a no-brainer as a player to watch in Jimmy Snuggerud, because this guy was third in scoring in the tournament last year with 5 goals and 8 assists. And on top of that, he's absolutely destroyed the NCAA. Last year, he was the co-scoring champ with 50 points in 40 games for University of Minnesota. So just a pure offensive threat that in his second tournament, I expect to be even more dominant, especially with a pretty strong Team USA, especially up front. But yeah, pure offensive threat. He's one of those playmakers that always keeps defenders guessing. And when they start to give too much to respect to his playmaking game, he'll just rip one in himself. He kind of looks people off, or like they were talking about Pasternak in the game last night. He's started to get so much respect for his playmaking game that he looks at a player to pass to, boom, back of the net himself. So, yeah, he's a dual threat, that's for sure.
You know who's sneaky good at that case in the NHL is Kucherov. Kucherov, like, he'll be in a shooting position where you think he can only rip it, so and you have to respect the shot, and then he finds a pass that no one else on the planet sees. So
yeah, well, Kuch is probably a better comparable because, I mean, Pasternak known as a sniper, and now people are respecting the shot, so he's getting a playmaking ability in. But Kucherov is a playmaker. That's what we know him as. So he's
but he can sneaky rip it
like that. Yeah,
dude, he could potentially win the Hart Trophy this year. Like he's been that good.
Oh hell yeah.
But yeah, Snuggerud, like, I'm just looking at last year's stats. It was him and Cooley. Like it was those two guys who were carrying the team. Cooley had 7 goals, 7 assists for 14 points in 7 games. I didn't know he was that good last year. I didn't even realize, but
yeah, because there's a guy named Connor Bedard that we were busy paying attention to, scoring 23 points.
Exactly. But yeah, Snuggerud, and then after that, it was Cutter Gauthier, who had 10 points in 7 games. He's returning this year. Ryan Ufko, Chaz Lucius, Rutger McGroarty, who is returning this year. So, you know, like they have a very stacked roster, but I think Snuggerud is going to be one of the guys who is really heavily relied on to produce. And, you know, if I had to pick a favorite for the tournament, I think it would be the US, as much as I hate to say it. You know, they have they're pretty deep at every position, including goaltending as well. Like they have Trey Augustine, who, you know, is a 2005 born goalie, but he was drafted by Detroit, if I'm not mistaken, pretty high.
Yeah, he was.
Like, yeah, he was a second rounder. So, you know, like they've got depth in every position, but I think Snuggerud is going to be one of the guys they rely on the most. Another guy I was looking at is James Haggins. Have you guys looked into this guy at all? 2006 born player.
Yeah.
Eligible not for the 2024 entry draft, but the 2025 entry draft. So I thought that was interesting.
He could. I've seen. Sorry to cut you off, Chad. I've seen a few people say that he could potentially overtake Michael Misa for that number one overall as the number one overall pick in that draft. And yeah, he's a good player, man.
Yeah. So I was just looking at like some of the stats, and he was a player who jumped out to me because he's so young. But he has, between the U.S. development program and the USHL this season, he has 53 total points in 33 total games, again, between the two leagues. But with all that being said, I'm not sure this player even makes the team, because if you look at the United States roster right now, it's incomplete. It's not finished. Final cuts haven't been made. They have like 12 defensemen currently on this roster, and 16 forwards. So clearly some cuts will be made. And I feel like, there are just too many players on this team who have been drafted to the NHL already, who have played in this tournament before, who will probably take priority over this young player. So he was going to be a player to watch for me, and still is. I mean, certainly if he makes the team, but he's not going to be the player that I'll be the most focused on. That's going to be Will Smith. That's the player I'm going to be watching at this tournament. 2005 born, San Jose Sharks 4th overall pick in 2023. And, fourth overall, look at the three guys who went ahead of him in that draft. They're all currently playing in the NHL right now. So those are the players that Will Smith is comparing himself to. And if that doesn't light a fire under you to come into this tournament and absolutely dominate, I don't know what will. Like when he looks at Connor Bedard, who is just shy of a point per game in the NHL, he's thinking to himself, maybe if I was in the league, right now I could do something similar. Realistically, he probably compares himself more to an Adam Fantilli or a Leo Carlsson, who is sort of in that second tier of player from that draft, because Bedard is just so special. But Will Smith, man, I think people are maybe sleeping on this player, and I hope for his sake and for San Jose's sake that he comes into this tournament and absolutely lights it up for the USA, except for when they play Canada.
Yeah, well, I expect him to score a goal that we're just awing over, because his hands are phenomenal, and he's a guy that caught a lot of attention due to the draft last year. There's some people that thought he could be higher, and some people thought he'd be later. And let's hope that it doesn't go to his head in a negative way, and it goes the positive direction that you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Will Smith is this year's Logan Cooley for Team USA. I could certainly see that potential scenario for sure. His numbers are ridiculous. Looking at his elite prospects page, 127 points last year in 60 games with the U.S. U18 national squad. That is absolutely ridiculous with a capital R. And I think that he definitely has the potential to be an elite first line center in the NHL. Obviously, it's a pretty tall task, being the fourth overall pick with the three guys that went ahead of you. But look, man, I think that's going to go down as one of the strongest drafts that we've seen here in recent years, and he's certainly a big part of it. Boston guy, big part of the Sharks' future. And yeah, I could very much see him being this year's Logan Cooley for Team USA.
Now, I wanted to say this as we wrap up on Team USA. The team is so deep, right? There's so many players on this team who either are drafted or are draft eligible, who are tearing up their respective leagues. So it's not crazy to think that some really good players wouldn't be invited to camp or wouldn't make camp after tryouts. One player that I'm thinking of that we talked about last year as a player to watch, which is sort of an unfortunate situation, is Charlie Stramel. Guys, Charlie Stramel was drafted 21st overall last year and played on this team last year. And if I'm not mistaken, the year before as well. Yeah, he has played on this World Junior team twice, in 2021-22 and 2022-23. He didn't get invited this year. His numbers in the NCAA at the University of Wisconsin are not very good. He has 5 points through 12 games. He's a bigger forward. He brings a different element.
Yeah.
But just the lack of production, unfortunately, he's been passed by some other really good players. And that's just a player that I wanted to point out as, someone who unfortunately wasn't even invited to this camp.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that happens, right? And some regression in there. And looking at the 2024 draft, I mean, look at a player like Aaron Kiviharju, and a lot of that is from injuries. And he's obviously a young Finnish prospect, but is still projected to go relatively high. And kudos to him with how highly ranked he was before. I mean, he was projected at number 1 at one point. But looking at Stramel, Minnesota Wild first rounder, and that was maybe a bit of a reach as well by Bill Guerin and the staff there, taking him at 21. But yeah, surprising to see a player like that who's been with the U.S. team for the last couple of tournaments there not get invited back. But we've seen it happen before. Quickly, guys, before we wrap up on the Americans, player to watch for me, and again, I know that decisions still to come with this roster, but I'm going to go with Frank Nazar of the Chicago Blackhawks, and obviously a smaller forward who can play both center or wing, but this guy certainly knows how to score, and I think is going to be a big part of the Blackhawks' future. When you look at just the American-born players that the Blackhawks have in their system, you look at a guy like Drew Commesso, a goaltender that they have, Oliver Moore, who they took with their other first-round pick in this past draft, and then looking at that 2022 draft where they drafted Kevin Korchinski, and then the two Americans after that in Frank Nazar and Sam Rinzel, another defenseman who may very well make this team as well. But I'm going to go with Frank Nazar. Could be a future line mate of Connor Bedard's down the road. 18 points in 18 games with the University of Michigan. So again, another great player out of the Michigan system. They continue to pump guys out year after year, and he's a point per game there in the NCAA. So yeah, going to go with Frank Nazar for the Americans.
Yeah, and has historically torn up the development program too. He's a point machine. Guy scores goals. If he's not one of their top scorers, or at least one of their more effective players, I'll be a little bit shocked.
Honorable mention: Gabriel Perreault, New York Rangers first rounder. That guy scores goals and puts up a ton of points. So, this roster's stacked, man. Not to mention Ryan Leonard in there as well, Capitals first rounder. Yeah, this is a really good USA team, that's for sure.
I think they're the obvious favorites. I hate to say it, but I think they're on paper they're obviously the best team. Am I off by saying that?
I don't think it's obvious. I think
Sweden
that Canada and Sweden are both good, and I actually am. I'm very curious to see how Slovakia plays out again.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice little segue there, Case. We'll go into the Slovaks now. Our next team to talk about here in Group B. So, Case, right back to you, dude. You're player to watch for the Slovaks.
Yeah, and not that I'm saying Slovaks are a favorite to win. I'm saying
no.
He said they're the favorites.
I'm saying that they can certainly ruin the party for the USA. Or whatever team doesn't make it out of this group. It's a pretty good group. So for Slovakia, though, I'm going to go with Adam Sikora. He's a returning player. This guy was an absolute engine for this team.
An animal.
Just on the screen at all times, it felt like for them, and that's what got him the top 3 player of the tournament for them last tournament. And despite having 1 goal and no assist in 5 games, it was his work ethic and his battle and compete and everything. It was phenomenal to watch. So he's very familiar in the Slovakian system. It's his third tournament. He's played for the men's team in the World Championship. He tore up as an 18-year-old last year in Slovakia in the professional league. 21 points in 38 games as an 18-year-old is tearing up, in my opinion. And now this year he's playing in the AHL, and he's put up 11 points in 23 games for the Hartford Wolfpack. So I'm expecting him to be on the ice in all situations: power play, penalty kill, 5-on-5, first line. This is a guy that I'm going to have my eyes glued to him, but just expect to hear his name a lot from Ray.
It's funny that you say, expect to hear his name a lot, because as soon as, like, when I was doing my research and I was looking through Team Slovakia, I see Adam Sikora and I just hear Gord Miller saying it in my head. It's the TSN crew, and, you hear the same names over and over. I feel like, that's just the nature of the beast when you play for one of the teams who don't have 20 NHL draft picks like Team Canada or USA. So Sikora is definitely a guy who will be relied on. The fact that he's playing in the American League right now and is, about half a point per game or a point every other game is pretty impressive. That being said, man, like, Case, I don't know if you're that far off in saying that this team could play spoiler, because they have some pretty good players now that you look up and down the forward group, especially. Like, I'm looking at a player like Dalibor Dvorsky, who we talked about, St. Louis pick, bigger guy who slipped in the draft a little bit with incredible hands. Sam Honzik is the Calgary Flames pick who was on this team. Philip Masher, Petrovsky, like, they've got guys. They do more so than, some of the other teams here. Like, and
it's the way they play the game. They're like stifling. In the World Juniors, you just don't expect to see that, because it's like this fast run and gun hockey. Well, they play good defense and then good goaltending. Yeah, this team can do anything. And I mean, I think we have to mention the goalie. I don't know if one of you guys are going to bring him up, but Gagin, I believe is how you pronounce it. He was phenomenal last year. He was the top 3 player of the team for them. He was the goalie of the tournament, if I'm not mistaken. So to have him back, like, that doesn't happen very often, to get a goalie back-to-back seasons, and definitely never happens that he was the goalie of the tournament. So we'll see. U20 World Junior Championship best goaltender 2022-23, and also top 3 player on the team. Adam Gagin, not sure exactly how you pronounce it, but we remember him.
Maybe.
I mean, throw that in there. Maybe we'll have to see how Gord Miller pronounces it, because we know he does his homework. He actually asks the players individually how they would like it pronounced. So we'll have to listen closely this time. But yeah, the second rounder, 35th overall by the Blackhawks in 2023. This guy was legit last year. And, even though he's not my player to watch, he's a guy, being a goalie myself, who I will be definitely watching, because for some of these teams, a goaltender can mean absolutely everything. It can mean winning the tournament in some cases if your goalie is hot. And, at the very least, playing spoiler in a tough group. So Adam Gagin, Gahan, however you want to pronounce it, he will be relied on to be good again this year. So be looking forward to watching that. The player that I'm picking as a player to watch is a Montreal Canadiens draft pick, Philip Mesar. Again, Mesar. I'm saying Mesar. I think that's how it's pronounced. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not Slovakian, so obviously I'm not entirely sure. But this is the guy who the Habs also picked in the first round, along with Juraj Slafkovsky in the 2022 draft. He was picked 26th overall. We saw the great picture of him and Slafkovsky together. They played together growing up. By all accounts, they're pretty good buddies, so they're pretty happy to both go to Montreal. He should be a go-to player on this team. He's a 2004 born guy, so he should be, relied on to produce offense. He does have a little bit of experience in the American League. He's played 2 games this season for the Laval Rocket, which is interesting. And then he has 32 points in 20 games in the OHL. So Mashar, I don't know. It seemed like when he was picked, he was a little bit off of some people's projections and certainly off my radar at the time, but he's turned into a pretty nice pick for Kent Hughes and company. So I'll be watching him, and Habs fans certainly should be too.
Yeah, he was pretty notable for them last year. I think actually the tournament last year was, I mean, it started to kind of prove the Canadians right, I would say, just based off the tournament. And sometimes the tournament can get players drafted higher, and sometimes the tournament can kind of solidify why they were picked where they were. And I think that's the case here.
Yeah, so he had 6 points in 5 games, which is tied for the team lead last year. And Simon Nemec, 5 points in 5 games last year of your team,
who's looked very good since he got called up. And you know, fellas, we've said this a handful of times on this podcast already, but talk about a hockey program on the rise. 3 first-round picks in 2022. First time ever that 2 Slovaks were picked back-to-back in Slavkovsky and Nemec in that 22 draft in Montreal. So, and guys, like, not saying that, you know, this team will be exactly like Czechia from last year, but just going through some of these names and some of the talent on this roster, I wouldn't be surprised to see this Slovak team maybe squeak out with a bronze medal or 4th or something. You know, not going to go as far as saying silver, but look, they've got the strong goaltender, like we mentioned, and some pretty notable players on this roster. And I'll go to one that we mentioned a few minutes ago for my player to watch for the Slovaks, and that's Samuel Honzik, first rounder of the Calgary Flames. Big body, can play wing or center, and look, his production in the Western Hockey League has been fantastic so far. Again, 19 years old, 6'4", just shy of 190 pounds, 56 points in 43 games with Vancouver last season, 23 goals, 7 points in 5 games to start the season, and coming into his 3rd World Junior experience with the Slovaks. 0 points in 4 games in 22, 0 in 2 games last year. So you know that for Samuel Honzik, as another year older, putting up the kind of production that he's had with Vancouver in the WHL, I think he's going to be a very good player for this Slovak team, and you know, certainly another big body like a Philip Bystedt in Sweden. So really curious to see Honzik play, and again another you know, future piece for a Calgary Flames team that has been in the middle for so long, and a team that we're starting to see some of their younger players emerge, like a Connor Zary, for example. So really curious to see how Honzik is going to do.
I read a bit in one of the Calgary the like Sports Nation posts about Honzik, and just reading kind of his scouting report, he's like Slavkovsky light in what they got in him, with his size and his like puck protection and the way he plays in the corner. Like he's turning on a dime at pretty big size, and then can play physical and knock you off the puck knock you away while he has the puck. And that's big in this tournament. Reminds me of Soderblom. Like, that guy stood out. He's massive, like a whole different type of massive. But the way that he was kind of able to control the play in the corner in the World Juniors, because all these guys are kind of, you know, if they're not short, they're at least slight in a way. So a guy like that who can control the play in the corners with his size and his reach and everything, that's valuable.
Definitely. I think it's cool, just to, you know, unrelated a little bit, but I think it's cool, like, as we've talked about a lot of these players, we've talked about them for previous episodes. Now that we've been doing the podcast for like whatever it is, 5 years now, we've talked about a lot of the players we've mentioned in draft episodes, and it's kind of interesting to see how they've sort of developed. Like, I know we're talking about Honzik, and he was just drafted this most recent draft, but a lot of the players in this tournament, especially the players who are expected to be relied on, are from that 2022 draft. And then there's a few from 2023. So it's pretty cool to see some of the players that, we talked about leading into their draft and then, seeing how they've developed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it just goes to show that the players just continue to get better and better every single year. So there we go. 3 players to watch for Team Czechia, or no, not Team Czechia, excuse me, Slovakia at this tournament. Czechia, of course, the team that we started with in Group B. So 2 teams to go, fellas, to finish off Group B here, the Swiss and the Norwegians. Let's get to Team Switzerland. Case.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of continue with the direction I went in Group A with these next 2 teams. I'm going to pick players that are in the up-and-coming draft and kind of notable prospects that could go fairly high. And my pick for Switzerland is Yamiro Reber, who is maybe the highest projected Swiss player in the upcoming draft. He's putting up pretty consistent points this season in the J20 as a 17-year-old. He's developed all the way up with the Swiss national team, the Swiss system at least. And I think the familiarity is going to get him a lot of ice time in this upcoming tournament, despite being one of the younger players on this team. So, I think the experience with Switzerland is what's key here.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is another team where, it's not an even split, but amongst their players, it is pretty split in terms of guys who are playing against men in whether it's the top league in Switzerland or, whether it's the J20 or, whatever it is. They're playing against some stronger players, I would argue. And then you've also got some players playing in North America in the OHL, the QMJHL, which, by the way, is not the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League anymore. You guys see this? It's the Quebec Maritime Junior Hockey League, the QMJHL. They changed the name today. But yeah, on that theme, I'm going to go with a player named Miles Mueller of the Moncton Wildcats in the QMJHL. He has 29 points in 30 games played this season. He's a returning player from last year. So I think that he will be a guy who will be relied on to produce offense for this team because, let's be honest, like the Swiss coach said a few years ago, a lot of these teams are bigger, faster, and stronger than them. So they have to, play a tight system and rely on the skill that they do have. So I think Mueller will be a player who is relied on. He is undrafted. And last year he had just 1 point in 5 games. But I think being a returning player and seeing as how he has some pretty good production in the Q, I think he will be one of the offensive drivers for this team.
Yeah, could certainly see that for sure, and a very familiar National Hockey League player name on the Swiss roster, and that is the last name of Meyer. So I'm going to go with Endo Meyer as my player to watch on the Swiss team. A right shot, right winger from Zurich, Switzerland, could be a late round pick in the upcoming NHL draft. Originally started the season with the Barrie Colts in the OHL, just 1 assist in 4 games. He has gone back to Switzerland, playing with the GCK Lions there. He has 1 assist in 5 games. But looking at some material online on this Endo Meyer, again, 18-year-old draft eligible player, led Switzerland in scoring at the U18s last year. He is a smaller winger, skates well, and has a ton of skill. So potentially another great Meyer out of Switzerland. We'll see there, but because we know what a great player Timo Meyer has become for out of Switzerland. So and again, case for your Devils, it seems like they have every Swiss player in the NHL. It's crazy. Yeah, exactly. It's wild. So again, kind of a program that hasn't been as strong as previous years, and we mentioned that with another program like Germany. But Switzerland, certainly a great hockey country. Chad, you mentioned just the like Adler Mannheim and Germany and all of that, and those great teams over there, and talk about Switzerland as well. Big part of the Spengler Cup every year, and so certainly a great hockey nation. They will be a little thin this year in the tournament, but yeah, this is a player in Endo Meyer who could be a really good player for them.
Yes, two things to wrap up. First, I don't think we can call Timo a superstar in this league anymore until he starts producing for my fantasy team, who is in absolute shambles right now. I don't know if you guys have checked in on fantasy, but my team's not doing very well this year. It's not very good, and Timo is a huge part of it. So yeah, Timo, if you're listening, please start producing. And secondly, I think it is important to mention for this team that they do have just the one player who is drafted to the NHL, and that's Rodwin Dionchio. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but I did my best. He is the one player on this team who has been drafted. He was taken in the 5th round by Anaheim in this most recent draft. So that could be another player who is expected to produce.
I thought for sure you were going to pick Benjamin Quinn because he's born in the Big Smoke. So,
I mean, yeah, it just slipped my mind, I guess. Maybe I was focusing on Meyer and my fantasy team too much.
Meyer Mueller.
Yeah, so it's great to see these familiar hockey names come up, years later, and certainly, I think he may not be the only Meyer on this roster. I believe there are 2. I could be mistaken.
Yeah, there's a Simon Meyer, and by the way, I have to mention the Leafs were down 5-0 to Columbus. It's 5-5.
Of course it is.
It's going into overtime.
Of course it is, because every game that the Toronto Maple Leafs play goes beyond regulation. That is what is
every
happening
game
this
they
year.
play has to be an absolute roller coaster, and can't just be a quick little 3-2 win or a 4-1 put away.
Oh
anyway.
Goodness. All right, fellas, let's wrap this up and get to our final team here in Group B, Team Norway. So Case, take it away with our final team that we're going to talk about here, Norway.
All right, before I get going here, if you're Norwegian, I'm sorry. We're not going to say any of these names right, and all of you have way too many names. So let's get into it here. Pleasantly surprised in this program and some upcoming players. Looking at the 2024 draft, there's a couple players that stand out, and then looking at the J20, it's being taken over by Norwegian players and guys like Nygaard and Bakkevig.
Good try.
But neither of those are the guys I am going to pick. Noah Steen. Steen played a big role in them being here, winning gold at the Div 1A championship last year, getting them back into the top flight. He also played for their men's team that year in the World Championship, which is something to note for his age. He started off this year tearing up the J20, another Norwegian player tearing up that league, but he's since got the call up to the Hockeyallsvenskan, the second league in Sweden, playing for Mora IK. I actually looked at their last game to double check that he's still there, and he scored. So I don't know if I'm good luck or what that is, but that was just the other day. He's got 4 goals and 1 assist in 22 games in that league as a young player, 19 years old, playing the Allsvenskan, playing pro hockey in Sweden as a Norwegian player. Like, that's great to see. Hoping for some big things from this player. Just kind of the stuff I read about him I like, so I went with Noah Steen.
Nice. Good pick. I think it's worth mentioning that this team has 0 drafted players, so Case, you went the right route in looking at players who could potentially be picked in the upcoming draft. And I did sort of a similar thing by looking at a player, Matthias Deli, 2006 born player playing in Norway's top league, with 7 points in 13 games, is a top eligible draft prospect for the upcoming draft. So that was one player. But I wanted to focus on centerman Johannes Lakeberg, who is a point per game in the BCHL. It's not often you see Norwegian players playing in the BCHL, so I thought that would be an interesting player to pick. And in terms of, when you sort these players on this team by production in their respective leagues, Lakeberg is up there in the BCHL with exactly a point per game for the West Kelowna Warriors. So I think Lakeberg could be a player who is, turned to produce a little offense for Norway. With that being said, we talked about some teams who are sort of teetering on relegation, and it's worth noting that Norway was not in the tournament last year, if I'm not mistaken. So this is a team who may have a little bit to prove, and maybe that lights a fire under some of the players on this team. We'll see how that plays out, but I think it's worth mentioning that there are some players here that who some of which are playing in North America and some of which are eligible for the upcoming draft. So even though they were not in the tournament last year, they will still be good television this year.
Harper, I think it's worth mentioning that maybe Chad doesn't listen to us when we talk, because I did say that they got promoted last year thanks to Noah Steen from Div 1A.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. I was focusing on the fact that the Leafs are in overtime, but nevertheless, it was in my notes. I had to make sure it was out there if it wasn't. Apologies, Case. The Leafs are more important than Div 1A Norway. Sorry.
Fair enough.
I look at this Norwegian team, and I think there is a slight window open here for them to maybe be ahead of teams like Germany and Switzerland at this tournament, just by some of the players that they have here. And Casey, you mentioned Noah Steen there, and obviously we mentioned him just for a second, but have to mention again Michael Branzig Nygaard, who just continues to rocket up the pre-draft rankings going into the 2024 NHL draft. I've seen him as high as like 10th. So he could be a very high pick, who's a Norwegian player, and we haven't seen a lot of those. And obviously, Matt Zuccarello has turned into a hell of a player in the National Hockey League. But I'm looking at a guy like Nygaard, maybe being this year's version of Marco Rossi for Austria, where he doesn't have a ton of help around him, maybe one or two other guys. Certainly Steen, having a player like that will help for Nygaard, but that's kind of who I compare this kid to. I don't think that's too far out in left field.
Yeah, this is the one of the guys I looked at with three names that I can't pronounce, and he is well regarded as a first round pick next year.
Yeah.
And there's some disagreement on where, but I mean, Dauber has him as high as 9th. So.
Yeah, there you go. So, no, it would be interesting to see how that plays out for sure. Guys, I'm not going to lie to you. Had a bit of a tough time going with someone from Norway, and certainly there are a few of those countries that we run into where it does get a little harder to pick players. But I'm going to give credit to Stephen Ellis on this one. He looks at prospects for dailyfaceoff.com, and he's got a player to watch in Felix Granith. He's a centerman, one of Norway's top players at the U18s last year, and could get some pretty big opportunities at this year's tournament. And he's a responsible two-way forward, being described as, and has shown some good speed and skill playing in the Swedish U20 league. So I will go with that player for Team Norway, Felix Granith, a two-way centerman.
I feel like the NHL should play more games in Norway to grow the game there, because man, they're right next to Sweden and Finland, and those two countries have great hockey programs, relatively similar populations. I don't know. Norway seems like they could easily trend in the direction of being a legit competitor. So,
Sweden has almost twice the amount of people.
Yeah, but Finland is about the same. Denmark's about the same.
Yeah.
You know.
That's fair.
Yeah. Could certainly go and play a game over in Oslo. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, they may have already, to be honest. I feel like the NHL has been doing the global series for a while. It's just not promoted very well, but the point stands. Like this is an up and coming program. Clearly, Case, I was listening, they were promoted. So yes, up and coming program, who could, continue to build.
Yeah, that's right. All right, fellas, anything else before we put a bow on this thing?
Please, no. I'm gassed. What a marathon this was.
Yeah,
I'm glad we got it done, though.
Yeah,
we got all of our content out that we wanted to, and
that's right.
Now it's Christmas break, boys.
That's right. It this preview for the World Juniors, it's a fun one, but it's certainly a marathon every year. But hey, we enjoy it, and we hope you will as well. Again, the previous episode with TSN Director of Scouting, Mr. Craig Button. So a little Christmas gift from us to you listeners with having a guy as highly respected as Craig on the pod, and again, just always so much fun to do these preview episodes for the upcoming World Juniors. Again, the 2024 IIHF World Junior Hockey Championships from Sweden starts Boxing Day with a lot of early games because it is in Sweden. So make sure you're not too hungover on Boxing Day to see Canada play their first game against Finland at 8:30 a.m. on TSN. Like we mentioned, we are going to be taking our holiday break, and we will be back in the new year. So Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays from the three of us, and we'll talk to you again in the new year. Enjoy the World Juniors.
This has been another episode of Boys in the Booth with Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams. Connect with the Boys in the Booth on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Boys in the Booth. Visit boysinthebooth.com for show details. And don't forget, you can become a patron of the podcast for just $1 a month at patreon.com/boysinthebooth.